All right, welcome everyone to our final session of the Working with Latin American Immigrants Virtual Professional Development Series. My name is Corinne Zaragoza Estrada. I am the Outreach Coordinator at the UNC-DUKE Consortium in Latin American Studies. And our final session of the week is the Latino, Latina Immigrant Student Panel. And we have three amazing students or recently graduated students joining us today. We have Marisa Carlton, Bryan Cuevas, and Gabriela Silva. Who will be speaking about their experiences as Latin American immigrants coming up through the school system in North Carolina. So thank you all for joining us today. And before we get started, I do want to go through just a couple of little housekeeping kind of things. A few Zoom etiquette reminders I think most of you already know. Please mute yourself during the presentation. You can see that mute button in the bottom left-hand corner. To improve internet connectivity, please turn off your videos for all the participants. And if you have a chat, we will be having a Q&A at the end of the presentation or at the end of the panel. You can actually just put those in the chat and we'll direct those to our panelists at the end. A few workshop session notes. This session will be recorded and uploaded to the UNC-DUKE Consortium YouTube channel. So if there's something you want to go back and rewatch, or if you want to share this with people in your organizations, in your communities, or in your school environments, you can direct them to this workshop session at a later date. We should get that by the end of next week. And we don't have a presentation exactly because we're just going to be speaking with our panelists. So I'm going to stop sharing. So you can see their beautiful faces a little bit better here. And we're going to jump right in. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your time and your expertise and talent and being willing to share your story. I know that's a really brave thing to do. So thank you for that. My first question would be to kind of introduce yourselves, tell us, your name, your major, where you're from, what country you're from, just kind of basic introduction type thing. We'll start with Bryan because he's the one closest to me that I can see.
Hey everybody, how are you all doing? Hope you are doing great. My name is Bryan Cuevas. I am a current rising senior at the University of North Carolina. I'm majoring in management and society with a minor in business. And I'm also a Carolina Latinx Center ambassador and co-president of the Association of Latino Professionals for America. In both roles, I specialize in providing Latinx students the resources for career and professional development. I'm also super passionate about helping others find their full potential and be successful everywhere and anywhere they go. If I could leave anything behind for future generations, it would be the power to fight off economic disparities, especially in our community. And also being born and raised in Puerto Rico allowed me to experience some of these things, and it's having the opportunity now to be here, to be a UNC student, and to just almost graduating soon. So having a degree, that would be an awesome opportunity, and I hope that I could help others achieve the same goal, if not more.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryan. Marisa, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Carlton. I just recently graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I double majored in global studies with a concentration in international politics and an area study in Latin America, and also communication studies. And my concentration was interpersonal and organizational communication. I actually just recently stopped working with, I just got done working with ISA with the Latino Migration Project and the Institute for the Study of the Americas at UNC Chapel Hill. I was working with Corinne and Hannah, Dr. Hannah Gill, who works there. And yeah, I'm originally from Mexico, and I've been living here in the United States for about 18 years now. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm glad to be here.
Great, thanks, Marisa. Gabby?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriela Silva. I'm currently a rising sophomore at UNC, double majoring in Italian and business. And I'm originally from Brazil. I moved to the US when I was 7, so I've been here for a while now, and I love Brazil, but America is also my home, and I can't wait to share that with you guys throughout this panel.
Which is a great segue into my next question to you all, is what do you want people to know about your country and its culture? Gabby, do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can definitely start. I think one of the things I always want people to know about Brazil is how many different cultures are within that one country. You have Afro-Brazilians, a really big population of German Brazilians, and even Japanese Brazilians. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, how in one country there are so many different cultures and traditions. And so it's really, I find that a lot of people will generalize what Brazil is, and it's like so much more than you could expect. So just to have that in mind and to know that even like one interaction with someone from a country doesn't really give you the whole view of what that country is.
Yeah, excellent point. Great. Marisa, do you want us to tell us a little bit about what you want people to know about Mexico?
Yeah, I was gonna say something very similar to Gabriela. It's, you know, within Mexico and within a lot of Latin American countries, these countries, they're often generalized and kind of grouped into the same category, but within each country and even within each region of each country, it's very different, different customs, different traditions. Like Gabriela said, there's a large you know, Afro-Latino population in these countries. There's a large indigenous population in these countries. And my mom, she's actually indigenous. So, you know, I'm very connected to that side of like my Mexican heritage, which is, you know, vastly different from, you know, someone who isn't indigenous or somebody who grew up in a large city versus a small town. So yeah, especially within Mexico and all these Latin American countries, it's not, it's very diverse, and depending, you know, where you're from, you're gonna have different traditions. But I would say overall, generally, it's a very we're very close and warm, and tend to be like very vibrant is what we're seen as. And so yeah, but number one thing is it's very diverse.
Excellent, thank you. And Bryan, tell us a little bit about what you want people to know about Puerto Rico.
Well, despite its current economic conditions, right, I can say it's a place full of rich culture and also cuisine and joyful people. I feel like there should be an emphasis on the people, because the people there truly make it what it is today. Um, People are like family. They greet each other. They're warm. They're supportive. They're everything, and that's what I think I should emphasize about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a place where you will feel like you're part of the Puerto Rico. You're part of, you know, um, of the family. So yeah.
Great, thanks. My second question to you all is to describe your immigration experience, or for Bryan, your experience coming here from a different place. Yeah, Marisa, can you start us off with that?
Sure, yeah. So I was born in Mexico. I was born in a small town on the Gulf Coast end of Mexico, on the eastern coast, called Tecolutla. It's a very small little fishing village. And I was born there, and well, my experience is a little different. Of course, everyone's experience is different and very individualized, but my mom, like I said, she's indigenous, and my dad, he's actually Caucasian. He's from the United States. So from the very beginning, I kind of had, you know, that Mexican American identity, which is something that I also struggled with, especially throughout school. But I didn't move to the United States until I was 4 years old. My mom, it took her that long to get her visa, her green card, to get her papers to legally come to the United States. So that process was really long for her, and she actually started it when she got pregnant with me. And you know, it didn't, she didn't get those documentations until I was 4 years old, so 4 years later. So yeah, at the age of 4, my family and I, both my parents and me, we moved to Mississippi, which is where my dad previously had like property and a home. And on his side of the family, they were in Mississippi and Louisiana. So at the age of 4, I moved to Mississippi, and yeah, that's kind of where the immigration process started for me.
Great. And when did you move to North Carolina?
I moved to North Carolina when I was 14 years old.
Very cool. Great. Gabby, do you want to tell us about your immigration story?
Yeah, so like I said, I came to the US when I was 7 due to my dad getting a job opportunity here. So our entire family moved straight to Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's where we've lived ever since. But not trying to get too ahead of myself, but I can say that the beginning of the whole move to the US was filled with a lot of headaches, especially from not knowing the language, not knowing cultural norms. So every day was a school of its own in trying to learn this culture and these people.
Great, thank you. And then Bryan, tell us about moving to the mainland US.
Yeah, so me and my family moved to the US back in 2008. We moved to Florida actually, because we had a neighbor that lived there, and she was like, "Hey, come this way," and so we moved that way. So my parents didn't really have a job, so when they got here, that's when they started applying, and my dad was luckily able to find a job at a nearby school as a custodian, and my mom as a secretary, or actually as a working in retail. Um, so it was a different. We lived very in this residential that is for families that need assistance. So it was quite different than what we were comfortable with in Puerto Rico. Um, and also, like, I just remember a lot of tough times for us, especially with the language and with making ends meet with the source of income. So yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing your stories with us. That means a lot. So once you moved to the United States, tell us about your experience in the K-12 school systems here in the US, whether it was initially in a different state or in the state of North Carolina. Gabby, do you want to tell us a little bit about growing up in Charlotte?
Yeah, I can definitely start that off. I think one of the first memories I have of the US is going into this CMS, the district building, and taking a test on English to see where I was going to be placed. And I remember them completely disregarding the test since I didn't know English and just placing me with the age group I was at the moment, and started school off right away, started ESL out as soon as school began for me, which was very interesting. Being Brazilian and speaking Portuguese, that's not something that a lot of people are used to. When you hear Latinx, it's normally Spanish. And so with my ESL experience, my ESL teacher would try to speak to me in Spanish, which I obviously didn't understand. And so I was learning Spanish and English at the same time to kind of get my head around this new language. And yeah, that's why I also said that the first few months even were filled with headaches and just like trying to understand what people were saying. And also like going on K through 12, I would say that until 5th grade, that was the hardest years I had in my K through 12 education. Even in 2nd grade, I was sent to summer school for failing English, although that was my 2nd year of even learning the language. So it was very interesting, very hard. And I would say that I was still like trying to get to the same level as the other kids up to 5th grade.
Excellent, thank you for sharing. Bryan, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience in K-12 education systems?
Definitely. So my experience was quite different. When I lived in Puerto Rico, I went to a private school. So when I moved to the United States, I went into the public school system, and that was quite a shock. It was different, and also the language barrier was quite something. I remember I came in the 4th grade, and I lived in Florida at that time, and it was a very predominantly American island, I would say, because it's a small island in Florida. So they didn't really have an ESL teacher for me until like 5-6 weeks later. So it was just like my fourth grade teacher trying to help me as much as she could, knowing the little Spanish she knew. And also like, it was a very rough for me, at least. And then I moved to North Carolina when I was 12. Came here to a middle school that was in a very impoverished area, and that kind of even raised more concerns because I hadn't experienced that back in Florida, and I just saw all the inequities that students get from being in a impoverished area, and the amount of funding that the school gets is really bad. So that kind of started my interest in that field. And so for me, it was a tough experience, but it made me who I am today, and I'm grateful for it. So yeah.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Marisa, tell us about your K-12 school experiences.
Yeah, so mine is also very different than Bryan and Gabriela's. And so I started off in school in Mississippi on the Gulf Coast. It was a very small town again. And I did have, well, when I moved to the US, I didn't know any English, even though my dad, he spoke English, and but when he spoke to me, he would speak to me in Spanish. He learned a little bit of Spanish, but I would mostly speak Spanish to my mom, especially at home. And when we moved, I knew absolutely no English. So my parents enrolled me in preschool. So I started off in pre-K, knew no English, and really, I don't remember them, helping me like at my preschool teachers. I don't remember them. I was one of the only, if not the only, Latina student, really for most of my elementary school years in Mississippi. So I remember learning English on my own with my dad's help, watching cartoons. So that help I needed to learn English in school really wasn't there. And so I went on to kindergarten, first grade, and second grade in Mississippi. And again, I was one of the only Latino students. I didn't really relate to a lot of other students. I felt like I didn't really relate to the teachers. I had to learn English on my own, but at an early age, it was a lot easier for me to pick that up. So then in second grade, my family and we moved to South Texas, which was very different. South Texas, it's predominantly, I would say, a large Latino population and a large Mexican population as well. So I felt, at first when I moved, I was a new student. I was the new kid at school. Of course, I felt a little distant, felt a little alone. But as I made friends and got used to being there, I just felt it. I didn't feel out of place. Almost all of the students, were Latino or had some Latino heritage. Almost everyone knew Spanish. Even my teachers were of Latino descent. So that was really helpful to kind of be in that environment for me. And then again, I moved back to Mississippi in fifth grade, and that whole experience that I had when I was younger, I felt out of place. My teachers didn't really, my culture, my traditions, it was very different in that school system than it was in Texas. And so I remember taking, because Spanish was my first language, I remember like in fifth or sixth grade, I had to take like an ESL test every year, and they always pulled me out of class to take it. And it was almost as if I was treated differently. I felt I stuck out like a sore thumb. Again, I was one of the only Latino students, and so it just made me feel out of place, even though at that point my English was pretty up to par to other students. I was still treated differently because Spanish was my first language. And I felt, yeah, I just felt very singled out. I felt like they treated me differently. But once I moved up through, through middle school and high school, which is when I moved to North Carolina, my experience was completely different. It was wonderful. I went to a small magnet school here in North Carolina, also a very small town, Hickory, North Carolina. And I mean, my experience in high school here also was very different because it was very individualized. It was a very small school. My graduating class was 23 students. So I would say it was probably the best experience I could have had in a K through 12 system here in North Carolina.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. My next question, we'll have Bryan maybe answer this one, take this one on first. What did your school and or teachers do to help you be successful, right? You had to have achieved some level of success, right, in order to attend UNC. So what are some things, some memories that you remember of teachers that supported you in the school environment?
Definitely. So well, I should start by saying that I always saw my teachers as mentors, and as I've always treated them like family to me, and I think that helped a lot. But I also have some instances where I remember in the fifth grade, there was a field trip to go to the Kennedy Space Center in Orlando, and so I couldn't afford to be sent to this trip, and one of my science teachers was pulled me out and was like, I could help you get the cash and we could send you to the trip. And so thankfully she did, and I was able to go, and that was a very touching memory to me. And so fast forward to high school, I felt like I needed to do something because I was very shy at first. I remember I used to instead of going to the cafeteria, I would stay in the classroom. So what I did was I was kind of pushed by my teachers to like step out of my comfort zone. And one of the ways was joining clubs. I joined the Future Business Leaders of America Club in my high school. And after a semester of doing that, one of my teachers said, "Hey, you'll be a great candidate to run for president for this club." And I was like, all right, I'll try that. So I really enjoyed that. And just so after that, it was just like stepping out of my comfort zone and just doing the most I can with their help and their support.
Awesome, great, thanks. Marisa, what about you? What are some things that your teachers did to support you and help you be successful in school?
Yeah, it was kind of a similar story to Bryan's too. When I moved to Texas, we actually moved because we had to evacuate Hurricane Katrina. So it was a very, very hard experience for us, for me, for my family. I was maybe 7, 8 years old at the time. I was in 2nd grade. And so I'll never forget, we didn't really have a lot. We expected to move back to Mississippi, but we had to enroll me in school, so we stayed in Texas. And so I didn't have any, school notebooks. I didn't have a backpack. I didn't have all those things that a kid needed. And at that point, we weren't in a financial state to where we had to prioritize what we could get. And so I remember being in school and I just broke down crying because I didn't have a backpack. And I remember the teachers, they all kind of got together and they got me the school supplies that I needed. And, it was very touching and something I'll never forget. And that I mean, teachers going above and beyond for their students, I think is something, especially for immigrant students, because all of our experiences are very unique, you know, depending on when you immigrated here to the United States. You know, there's going to be different things that families go through, that, you know, there may be legal problems or other things. And it's very important for, you know, teachers to be very understanding and patient. And yeah, that was one thing I remember is teachers just going above and beyond for me in that time of need. And then another time also, when I lived in Mississippi, we were technically considered, you know, lower class. So my parents, you know, they struggled with work and things like that. And there was the book clubs, the annual book clubs that come to school. And I never had any like extra money to like buy any books. And I remember my 5th grade teacher, Miss Smith, I still remember her, I'm friends with her on Facebook. She pulled me aside and, you know, she said, here's, you know, $15, you can go buy yourself a book. And like, I still remember that to this day. So just little things like that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. Thanks. And Gabby, what do teachers do to help you be successful in school?
I think one of the things that my teachers would do is connect me in the sense of first connecting me to classes or subjects that I might excel at. Like I remember in 3rd grade, I was still in ESL. I was still trying to keep up with English and everything. But one of my teachers saw that I was doing a little bit better in math. And so she put me in a talent development program for that, even with my English still being kind of weird. And so that was something that I hadn't expected I could do. But her having hope and faith in me helped me to see maybe I can excel further. Maybe I'm like not putting enough like hope in myself and my own efforts. And one of the other things that my teachers did was connect me to outside organizations. In high school especially, I remember not really having money for clubs or sports and all of that. And one of my teachers connected me with Studio 345 in Charlotte, where they take low-income students and they give them opportunities to try different art styles, whether it's photography or like podcasting, all of that. And one of my teachers connected me to them, and I was able to have a hobby and have something that I could do while I was like, while I normally would have been at home waiting for my parents to get back from work. I was able to be there learning a new hobby. And I was also connected to a career advisor for free in my last year of high school. That really helped me out. I wouldn't have had the money to get a college advisor any other way. So that was something that was really helpful. And I really appreciate that teacher for seeing my need and meeting me there.
Great. Thank you for that. Excellent. Great. My next question is, what kept you engaged with school? So things like extracurriculars, classes that were really engaging, and what made you unengaged with school? Let's start out maybe with Marisa on this one.
Yeah, so and I think in high school is kind of when what I remember most is when I was working towards college and things like that, was my time here in high school in North Carolina. And I think the number one thing was that one-on-one relationship and time that I had with my teachers. I think because I did have, you know, my school was very small, I was very fortunate to have that, you know, that extra attention that I needed from teachers to keep me on track, to check in on me, to ask me how I was doing. You know, they would talk to me if I was struggling in something or not doing as well in a subject, and you know, we would work on it together. And also, I think being involved in extracurricular activities, I never really did sports, but I was involved in a lot of clubs, like you know, I was in Beta Club and Honor Society, I was in Yearbook Club, things that I really enjoyed that kept me engaged in school as well, and kept my interest, really helped me. yeah, and just that, especially that one-on-one time with teachers was really helpful. And something like Gabriela said is, I didn't really have a college advisor, but the school counselor that I had, because we were so small, she almost acted similarly. So that was really, really helpful for me, because I had no knowledge of any colleges here in North Carolina, or anywhere really. Neither of my parents went to college, so I'm a first gen college student, and the process to me was completely new. I knew nothing about it, and so having that support from teachers, from my counselor, even from friends who, maybe their older siblings had gone or their parents had gone, and yeah, that was really, really helpful.
Excellent, thank you. Gabby, do you want to speak a little bit about your experience, what kept you engaged with school, or what made you unengaged with the school environment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that kept me most engaged was a program that I joined in 7th grade, which was the International Baccalaureate Magnet Program that had a really big focus on language and on culture. So most of the projects we were doing focused on different cultures, and it just had a bigger world view in terms of what we were learning in class. So that was very engaging. Also having teachers who would talk about culture and even Brazilian culture at some points in the class, that was something that always struck me and made sometimes the class even easier to remember if there was something in there that I related to. Um, just also, I had a teacher, one of my Spanish teachers was actually from Mexico. And so her sharing her own story throughout that really helped me be engaged in the class and want to learn and want to put in more effort because she was reciprocating and giving us her story so that we would also feel comfortable talking about our story. And some of the things that made me feel unengaged, I suppose, was even when teachers wouldn't want to bring in that cultural perspective. I know with some classes it's just not possible, but sometimes I would like start talking about my culture, but it wouldn't really be brought in. The subject would kind of be shut down, or people wouldn't listen to it. And also an unwillingness to relate to others also kept me unengaged. Even in like being an immigrant child, you kind of take over some adult responsibilities. And so when there were teachers who didn't understand that, it made me kind of unengaged from learning or from relating to them. I was expected to call about our billing, medical records. I was kind of doing all of that even from a young age. And so to get more empathy and understanding about that would have been great.
Great advice. Thank you. Bryan, tell us a little bit about your educational experiences, what kept you engaged in school and what kept you disengaged.
Yeah, so taking it back to when I first started here in the US. So I joined the Boys and Girls Club, and that was a very amazing opportunity for me because it kept me engaged and it allowed me to get help with homework and stuff like that, and also to make friends and be able to express myself with others. Um, I would say after school tutoring programs also helped. It kept me busy and kept me at school while my parents were working. Uh, but also the extracurricular activities as well. Back in middle school, I joined the Spanish Quiz Bowl, and in high school, the Key Club and Future Business Leaders of America clubs. So it allowed me to step out of my comfort zone, but also like be engaged in school and keep the same effort throughout the day. Um, and then when it comes down to unengaged, I definitely felt that during my middle school when I came here to North Carolina, because it was a very underperforming school, and we had a teacher go missing after like 2 weeks of classes. So the absenteeism. Then there's another teacher that actually resigned because that person could not handle the students at that school and the disrespect, which is, I mean, I get it, but it's also you're feel like you should make it an effort to relate to those students because they come from areas where they're being psychologically, you know, kind of in an economic space where they can't see brighter things. So definitely that, and I truly think that once once teachers relate to students more, they can help those students succeed. So.
Excellent, thank you. Great. One last final question before we open it up to our participants to ask their questions for you is what advice would you give to teachers and staff to help them make their schools and classrooms more welcoming to immigrants from Latin America? I'll start out with Gabby with this one.
I think if I had to give one piece of advice, it would simply be to create space during the day for those students, space for them to talk. Just like, even if you have to ask them a few questions and allow them to speak on their experiences and their culture, I think it's really important for you to do that, because in giving these students space to talk about, hey, maybe they are having to take care of all their siblings at home, and you not knowing that could like be detrimental to the way you communicate with them, or maybe they are the ones being the parental figure and they're taking care of all of this stuff outside of school. And I think knowing that is really important in, like we've been talking about, relating to the students, but also like interacting with them throughout the school day. And so yeah, that's the one advice I can give them space to talk about their life. And maybe even incorporate that into the lesson plan. Like today, we're gonna write about our experience at home or ask them a question. And I think from the teachers who would always have daily questions or weekly questions and reflection, that helped me a lot in learning how to self-reflect for myself in the future.
Great advice, thank you. Marisa?
Yeah, I would say something very similar to Gabriela. She touched on a lot of what I was thinking about, but also for teachers to be very understanding and very patient. I think understanding of, our culture, maybe our traditions, where we're from, our home life, like she said, trying to relate to us as well. Sometimes making it personal to where we can relate on that same level, and teachers trying to understand what some of these students go through, I think is really important, so that, if a student is underperforming, they may be able to find out why, or, what can we do to help you succeed, things like that. And another thing I would say is having good communication with parents too, because my parents, it's not that they didn't put in an effort in a way, but they didn't have, a lot of experience in the K through 12 system, especially my mom, because I'm her only child, and she's from Mexico, born and raised there. And, the education system in Mexico is completely different than the education system here in the United States. So, putting in that effort and reaching out to parents and having good communication with them is really important, because, parents help you, or your guardian, or parents or your guardian, or whoever helps you just as much succeed in school than your teachers.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a really great point. Great. And Bryan, what advice would you give to teachers and any other people working with students? What can they do to help them feel included and a part of a school system?
Yeah, I definitely think that teachers should act as mentors, as support, as pillars, if possible. I feel like they should, if they have the resources and the means, they should also connect those students with opportunities, and give them an extra hand. I know not everybody has those resources and is willing to do that, but I feel like it could be something that could help students. Something else might be just showing like you truly care about these students, making sure that they feel like they exist and that they're there. not like marginalizing them because you cannot understand their language or because you cannot communicate with them. So I feel like making sure that their priorities are straight and you know, giving them the attention that they need, the support.
Excellent, thank you. All that was a really great segue into the first question that we have from our participants. This is from Angela. She asks, what is the best way to connect with students' parents who do not speak English and to make them feel welcomed and part of a team working together? Are parents sometimes reluctant to engage with the school? Whoever wants to take that one first.
Yeah, I can take that. I can say from my own experience, my parents were always very reluctant to engage with the school and with the staff there. If there was ever a school conference or some call that needed to be made, they would always make me be the one to speak on their behalf. And so I took on my mom's role many of the times when there were any calls from the school, and my sister did the same in coming in for parent conferences rather than my parents. And that definitely came in the very beginning due to the language barrier. And I know that some of the other school, like later schools that I went to, tried to get the parents more involved by having correspondents go out in both English and Spanish. But I think it's really important for you to see like, oh, what country is my student from? What country do their parents come from? And then what language should I be sending this out in? I think one of the only instances in which I remember my parents going to school was when there was a translator with them. One of my sister's teachers said that she could get a translator out there for a school event so that my parents could understand everything that was being said. And that really made them feel more comfortable with participating.
I just also kind of want to ask, Gabby, did your school system or that you know have extra difficulties finding a Portuguese translator? I'm just also thinking about people who you know speak. I think you know whenever we think oh Spanish, but you know speakers who speak Portuguese or indigenous languages. Was there ever a time when they simply couldn't find a translator for your family?
Well, for me, that happened a lot. I always ended up being the translator when my parents were called into my school. But for my sister, she was put directly into high school, and at her high school, one of the counselors was actually Brazilian. So she, though not necessarily like an official translator, the counselor would be the one who would be at those events translating to my parents.
That's very lucky. Excellent. Marisa or Bryan, do you want to speak any or mention any or make us any other comments about getting parents who don't speak English involved in school communities?
Yeah, I would say that definitely my mom was a lot more reluctant than my dad. And I think it comes down to the language barrier. I think my mom just didn't feel comfortable communicating. She really didn't learn English until, you know, she was here for a few years. She took some classes, but, you know, when I was in school in Mississippi, there really weren't any other, you know, people that spoke Spanish, or I don't think they even had, you know, translators or interpreters. So a lot of that communication was with my dad. But even he, just growing up, also kind of low income, he really didn't have like a big involvement with the school either. And so, yeah, I found myself, you know, kind of explaining the forms to them or explaining my progress report to them. And I do remember though, in Texas, my parents participated a lot more like in after school ceremonies or celebrations, or if there was some sort of meeting. And I think it was because a majority of the parents and of the teachers and administrators, they also spoke Spanish. So, you know, my parents felt a lot more comfortable, and they could actually understand what was being said. So if there is an interpreter or a translator available, or someone who speaks Spanish, I think that would be, or, you know, whatever language, I think it could be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And though it isn't perfect, there's also tools nowadays that can help with that, technological advances at least. Um, so I personally didn't have that when I first moved. And it was difficult for my parents to make it to a lot of my school activities because they were also working. So it's it takes a little bit of accommodations, and even if you can't really communicate well with them, just for me, I felt like even when teachers like use their hands to try to explain the things, it was very helpful. So
Great, thank you.
I would like to add something else too, is that I've noticed too with Latino families that also the form of communication is important. So I think phone calls and maybe in-person meetings and texting is a lot better than maybe email communication, because just from my experience, I feel like the family and friends that and people that I've talked to, they don't really communicate via email that much. The response might not be as high. So if teachers just maybe went above and beyond, or made a phone call, or set up a meeting, it might be more productive in the end if over email or something like that.
So Gabby seconds that. I will third that as well. I was an ESL teacher for many years, and I did notice that there's an app called Talking Points. So if you don't speak another language, it's really great, because I can, as a teacher, you can send a message in English and it'll translate it. So when it sends it to Gabby's family, it'll translate it into Portuguese. When it sends it to Marisa's family, it'll translate it into Spanish. And I got a lot more response texting with an app than using email. And I also know a lot of teachers are also, from my experience, are very hesitant to call ESL families that speak other languages, because they're really afraid of having this moment on the phone where it's like, what, huh? So, that awkwardness. I've noticed a lot of teachers avoid that. So I highly recommend that app as well. And we have a really great question. And I will put the app in the chat. Hold on, I can't do two things at once. We have another really great question, which is, in what major ways is the education system in the U.S. different from the educational system in your countries?
I can go. So Mexico, actually, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the main reasons that my family and we moved to the United States was because of my education. And we moved at that age specifically because my parents wanted me to start school in the United States and not in Mexico. I don't know a lot about the Mexican education system, just simply because I didn't really grow up there, but from friends and family back home, and just from what I've heard from my mom, it's just very different, especially from where we're from, which is a very small rural town in Mexico. It's completely different from the education here in the United States. And I will say that you tend to get a better education if you attend a private school in Mexico. And many times those private schools will be Catholic schools, or tied to religion in some way. And it's a lot of money. I guess similar to here in the United States. I also didn't attend a private school here in the US, but yeah, that's a lot of people who, kind of had that good education in Mexico, they would attend private schools. And also the traditions, because my cousin, she attended a private Catholic school, and up until like 8th grade or 9th grade there. The grades are also different, but part of their school curriculum is doing like dances and activities. So every year they would, you know, the students would get together and do like traditional dances, and that was just part of the school system there. It was just really cool.
Yeah, and I don't claim to be an expert on the Brazilian school system, but one thing I can say, kind of like what Marisa said, there's a lot of private schools, and that I know of in Brazil, all schools, no matter if they're private or public, you have to pay for them. And so there is that barrier for those who are poor, who don't have that money. They obviously don't get the same kind of education as someone who is rich or living in an affluent city. Just speaking, I'm from Rio, and so schools there were a lot more expensive than the countryside where my mom was from. And my cousins all went to public schools in the countryside, still having to pay, of course. But one thing they would talk about is getting to choose when you go into school, especially in like middle and high school, or that equivalent in Brazil. You could go in the morning or in the evening, depending on if you had work or when your parents were at home. It really did revolve around family, because if you needed to be at home in the morning for your family, you would go to school at night. And so you definitely see how the culture impacts the schooling system. And I would say in school in Brazil has a lot of negative connotations just from schools that are around a lot of gang activity. You have shootings there that are gang affiliated, and so many students don't feel safe going. But also, surprisingly, there's a lot of student on teacher violence, where many teachers are afraid to go in because a student who gets a bad grade might become violent, and that happens a lot throughout Brazil. So yeah, I would say the school system is pretty negative, and my view of it and others' view of it also pretty negative.
I would add to that, I went to a private school in Puerto Rico, so I can't really speak much on the public, but I could say that the private school was very good. It was Catholic, so it was religious based. Um, but all I can say is the food was good. It was way better than the school food here. But on a serious note, we don't have public transportation like we do here. So if your mom doesn't have a car and can't take you to school, you're kind of there. And that was a very bit chaotic when back in 2017, I believe, 2018, they closed over 300 schools. And so that meant that students that lived far away and didn't have the public transportation to make it to their schools couldn't make it to school. So it's very chaotic in Puerto Rico, at least for public schools, and I'm sure it's the same way in other countries as well, but something that we have to deal with and try to reform.
Excellent, thank you. One last question, because we're kind of hitting the end of our time here almost. Maybe two more questions. One, did you ever find that your parents wanted you to embrace a white American culture so that you would have more opportunities in this country? Yeah, I'll leave that one there.
I can speak on that too. I would say that my parents probably did. And I don't know why I have such a contrary nature, but that made me want to keep with the Portuguese even more. When we went to Brazil, I would get Portuguese textbooks to keep learning and just really bringing my culture into those schools. But I definitely have friends who experienced that and who even lost their Portuguese completely because their parents did want them to assimilate. And now they're very, very sad about it, because knowing a language is only a bonus in the future and not ever something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I know for me, my parents made it like a priority to stay with the Spanish accent and speaking in Spanish, because all of our family is still over there. So, you know, we would have to communicate with them every so often. So, I don't think I would say they made me embrace the white American culture, but I know that that is something that can be contagious, especially surrounding yourselves in an environment where it's mostly American. Um, like I did when I lived in Florida, it was mostly white American wealthy people, and it was kind of hard to practice my Spanish back then. I'm thankful that I had cousins and then more people from Puerto Rico came along, but it's still kind of a domino effect. So
Yeah, I would say I definitely struggled with my identity just because my dad was Caucasian and my mom was indigenous from Mexico. I kind of had that split identity from the very beginning. And growing up I spent most of my time in school in Mississippi because I moved back there in 5th grade. So I went all of middle school. And so, growing up in a very white, southern, rural town in Mississippi, it's like I naturally lost some of my Mexican identity. I was embarrassed to, tell people that I was, Mexican or born in Mexico. I remember one time I told my friends that I was born in Texas because I was that, like, ashamed and embarrassed almost, and because it was so out of the norm in Mississippi. I was one of the only Latino students, so it was definitely really, really hard. But my mom and my dad both made it a point for me to not lose my Spanish. So I would always speak Spanish at home with my mom. Even if I spoke with my dad in English or if I spoke English at school, my mom made it a point to never lose, that Spanish language. But thankfully, when I as I got older and I learned to embrace my Mexican heritage. So very, very proud of that.
Excellent, thank you. One last quick question, because I do think this is something that we don't normally hear about. Are there any specific things that math teachers in particular did that were helpful to you in the US?
I think for me, back in 5th grade, I'm not the best at math, so it took a lot of one-on-one sessions with one of my 5th grade math teachers, and I think one of the most important things was just being able to relate and kind of have that try to patience to deal with people and using different things, different methods to accommodate to the students' learning. But I think because math is such a universal language, it's kind of the same everywhere. So, but it definitely takes a lot of patience and accommodation, like I said.
I think, sorry, go
Go
ahead, Marisa.
Just something really quick. Math was my favorite subject. It's always been my favorite subject, I think, because it came easy to me. It wasn't like language where with English I might have struggled, or even with Spanish I might have struggled, but math for me was very constant. And I think what really helped me was like middle school is when I really picked it up really well, breaking it down, really explaining it, simple steps. And I'm a very visual learner, so a lot of examples, a lot of practice, and just that one-on-one time again. If I didn't understand something, to break that problem down and simplify it, and helping me connect to that and help me learn better.
Yeah, I completely agree with Marisa and can definitely vouch for that. And like I said, math was one of the things that I was actually able to do even when I was still learning English. And so you asking about what else can you do that would be helpful, I think, like Marisa even said, just go through examples. If there's one thing that might keep English as a second language speakers from understanding math, it would be instructions. So if you're able to practice that and show an example, I think that kind of gets over the barrier of not knowing what you're supposed to do with all these problems on the sheet.
Excellent, thank you all for that. I am also with Bryan. I am not a math person, so good for y'all. Thank you all so much for your time, for the participants, for the panelists. I greatly appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your stories and being willing to talk. It's very much appreciated. For our participants, I'm adding into the chat a link that you can use to access a very short questionnaire that will allow you to get some CEUs for your participation in today's panel. Again, this has been recorded. Thank you all for allowing us to record this, and we're going to put it on YouTube so that you can share this with other teachers and kind of share the word and helping people to see the experiences of our immigrant students and what they're going through and the challenges and successes that they have. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for a wonderful session. And I wish everyone best of luck with the upcoming school year, whether you're a student or educator or recent graduate as well. Thank you all so much.